Tired of everyone telling you to find your passion, but no one telling you how? Welcome to the Korean Connection, and I'm your host, Korean, an attorney with a passion for empowering others to use their many talents and skills towards a path of self-discovery and alignment. Join me as I share my personal stories, professional insights, and practical tips, and how you can connect the dots between what you're great at and turning your passions into purpose. Let's connect. Push it to the left, make it go no more. Make it like no, I'm coming back home. I'm trying to roll all of my you. I'ma be the greatest, write my name in the stone. Write my name in the stone. Yeah, I'm coming back home. Yeah, I'm coming back home. Write my name in the stone. Cause I'm coming back home. Cause I'm coming back home. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Korean Connection. The verdict is out, and we are in the aftermath of the Diddy's verdict. And in this verdict, victim blaming, abuse, and why women stay was one of the crucial points, statements, I think, that was made after the delivery of this verdict. I'm your host, Kareen. And today we're diving into something that's heavy but a necessary conversation in the aftermath of the Diddy verdict. Now, Sean Diddy Combs was recently convicted on prosecution-related charges, but acquitted on the RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking charges involving Cassie Ventura and another Jane Doe. While some see this as a partial victory, others, especially Cassie and Jane, have faced brutal backlash and victim blaming and disbelief in wake of this trial. Today, we're talking about why women stay in abusive relationships and why it's so hard for society to believe them, and why this verdict and what this verdict says to survivors who want to come forward. We'll also look at how today's toxic relationship dynamics, where women are expected to want successful and a soft life from their partners, and how this toxicity played into this case. Let's address the elephant in the room, the public's reaction. Now, despite the evidence, many people, especially women, have dismissed Cassie and Jane, calling them gold diggers, liars, and saying they knew what they signed up for. Now, it begs the question, why is that, especially as women? Why is it so hard for people to accept that these women could be both victims and still stay in the relationship? Psychologically, abuse is cyclical. Victims often experience trauma bonding, where love, fear, and dependency mix into the addiction-like attachment. On the stand, Cassie described moments of affection alongside abuse. Now, that's classic manipulators. Abusers, guys, aren't abusers. They aren't monsters 24/7. What they do is they love bomb, then devalue. They isolate, then apologize. And that messes with your mind. But society doesn't get that, right? Certainly the jury didn't get that in this case, because we as a society, we expect perfect victims. Women who leave at the first red flag, right? At the first sign of abuse, who never smile in photos with their abusers, who never accept gifts or financial support, right? But real abuse doesn't work like that. Real victims stay sometimes for years because leaving is obviously and oftentimes more dangerous than staying, right? In the trial with Cassie and Jane, there was this dichotomy of, manipulation where, he would love bomb them, right? Give them all the gifts, make them feel like princesses, and do all the things that, we as women would strive for in this era of, the soft life and, being taken care of by a partner. And, they wanted those things for themselves as well. However, coupled with that was mixed in with abuse. It was mixed in with both emotional abuse and physical abuse that they endured while getting all the things that we all seek to get from our partners. So why is it that women wait to speak out, right? Now let's talk about some numbers. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, it takes an average of 7 attempts before a victim leaves their abuser for good. And a study from the University of San Diego found that only 25% of sexual assaults are reported to the police. Oftentimes because victims fear retaliation, shame, or what we're seeing now is that they're simply not believed. Think about that. Cassie and Jane came forward in a very high-profile case with money, power, and fame involved. Imagine the regular Jane Doe, right? Who have it much harder. Imagine how much harder it is for everyday women like those without the resources, those without, those abusers who are not celebrities. What does this verdict tell them, right? That even if you speak up, even if you have evidence of the abuse, people will still question you. They'll say things like, and we saw this obviously during the trial as well, why didn't you leave sooner? I mean, the prosecution had to call a whole expert to explain the dynamic of domestic violence and why women stay and what are the signs of abuse and the cycle of power and abuse and manipulation and all that it takes for a woman to just leave, right? And in this trial with Jane and Cassie, the question was about, well, you benefited from it, right? So there's this idea that if you obtain some level of benefit from the relationship, you have to remain silent. You can't complain. You can't be simultaneously abused while being afforded a lifestyle, right? But here's the truth. Final dependency is a tool of control. Abusers use money, status, and promises to keep victims trapped. For centuries, we've seen where, people of power, people of extreme wealth has used money to exploit women for sex. It's one of the oldest trick in the book, right? And when we live in a society that glorifies the idea of this soft life, where women are encouraged to seek wealthy partners for security, it creates this blind spot, because a blind spot for abuse, right? Because what happens when the provider is also your abuser? Women are placed in this position where they can't simultaneously have it all while being exploited. They can't simultaneously being afforded a lifestyle while being emotionally abused. So it begs the question, what did this verdict really mean? Right? What does this verdict of not guilty as it relates to Jane and Cassie for the sex trafficking charge, what does it say? Right? What does it tell us about the system that we live in? It says the system still struggles to recognize emotional and psychological coercion as real abuse. The jury in this case simply didn't see the split between Cassie's love for Diddy and as psychological coercion. It basically tells us as a society that unless there is a smoking gun, a video, and we even had a video. We had a video where we saw Cassie being brutally beaten. And all it was chalked up to was just, an instance of domestic violence between a couple that's sort of working it out, right? A couple that, has some level of toxicity where there's abuse sometimes in the relationship, but yet, there's this lifestyle that's being, lived. So it says unless there's a smoking gun, unless we have a perfect victim that acts like a victim 24/7, people will default to skepticism. But let's be clear. The fact that Diddy was convicted on any charges at all, is that even progress? Can we see that as progress at all, that he received a verdict of guilty on the prostitution charges, right? I mean, it was sort of cut and dry that he was hiring these prostitutes for these freak offs. And that was certainly believable and straightforward to the jury. But Cassie's and Jane's coerced participation in this freak off, even if it started out willingly, even if it started out as consensual, even if it started out with them just wanting to please their partner, doing what makes him happy sexually, because obviously they know that they can be swapped out at any time and they're trying to keep their man, right? Like most people do in their relationships, you try to keep the relationship going and make sure it works. But, the fact that he was even convicted on just the fact that he was just convicted on the prostitution charges and acquitted on these charges involving these two women who endured so much trauma during those freak-offs, what does it tell them? Does it mean that the door is cracking open with respect to progress? Or does it mean that we still have a long way to go in understanding how abuse works behind the closed doors? For these women listening, for women who are listening or in similar situation, your pain is valid. Your trauma is real. And if you're not ready to leave yet, it doesn't make you a liar or a fool. It makes you human. I think that was lost on a lot of us during this whole testimony of, the traumatic testimony that Jane and Cassie give. They're human beings. They're entitled to the back and forth in making up their mind. They're entitled to want to forgive their abusers, especially when the abusers say, "I will never do this again," right? That's what women tend to do. We're very forgiving as creatures. We're very loving. We're nurturers by nature. So to want to give someone an opportunity, even though it's a self-sacrifice to your own self, that's literally what women tend to do, right? So if you take anything from today's episode, let this be it. Let this be it. Believe women, even when their stories are messy, even when they've stayed with their abuser, because abuse isn't always about logic. It's usually about power, control, and survival. When you're looking from the outside of someone who's being abused, it's very easy to ask that question as to why they stay, because, you're looking at it like, what good is coming out of that situation? He's telling her, he's putting her down at every turn. He's abusing her. He's marking her body. He's inflicting trauma on her. The psychological manipulation that they have to go through and overcome even at the close of that relationship. It's so much to endure and so much to overcome that trauma. It's easy to ask the question as to why do they stay? But I implore you, in those circumstances when you're asking why they stay, I implore you to ask yourself, why did you stay in that situation? And whatever that situation is, it doesn't have to be so likened to the level of abuse or notoriety that these women endured. But why did you stay? Why did you forgive? Why did you look past that red flag, right? Why did you opt to want to give that person a second chance? What did they say to you to make you want to look past it? What things did they do? What portions of that person that you love? Because we always want to see a monster, or society makes you want to think as though this monster is a monster all the time. But this monster has soft moments. This monster has vulnerabilities. This monster also has trauma that you as a victim want to understand, that you want to give them grace for, that you're trying to, work with that person through overcoming, right? For the benefit of the relationship, for the long haul of the relationship. You want to see that person overcome, and you overcome together. So, you kind of justify taking a little batter and bruise, right? When you're with a partner and they say something that hurt your feeling, but it's rooted in their own trauma, you sort of rationalize, even what you felt and the pain you felt in being the victim of that, to give that person a space to grow and move past it, right? So if you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, resources, you know, resources are available, and you should know that you're not alone. And to every and Cassie and Jane that's out there, we see you and we understand how hard it is for you to come forward. We hear you and your story matters. And I think that's one of the things, I want to come through in this show. I'm wearing pink today in honor of all the women that's out there that is silently struggling, who's silently considering, what's the point, And I think also the verdict, is that what's the point of coming forward? Think about what the message that's sent from this verdict. And just from the example of what Cassie and Jane went through the media, right? On top of telling this deep, embarrassing, traumatic story about what they endured in a relationship with someone who they love and perhaps even still love to this day. Imagine the shockwave that this verdict sends when, coupled with the fact that the public was so aggressive with their feelings, was so unsympathetic to their pain, who blamed them for, chasing the bag and wanting to live that soft life. We have to stay strong and keep supporting each other throughout these moments, through each other weaknesses, right? And so one of the things that I want to implore upon us, just give each other grace. When you see someone in a situation where you feel as though they're being psychologically abused or physically abused, just let them know. Don't isolate. And I think sometimes too, it's hard for you to be in a situation where you see someone going through that and staying through that. It's like almost, there is an emotional burden that you as the onlooker sort of, feel in seeing that person going through that situation and knowing how powerless you may feel in that situation. But I think it's very important to let the person know that they still have your support. I think one of the things that abusers tend to do is isolate the victims in such a way that even when they're going through the hardest times and even when they feel as though they're ready to leave, they don't feel supported because they've alienated all of their support base. And so just even showing, telling those individuals who are in those situations that whenever you're ready, I am here. Whenever you need someone, I'm never far away. To know that if there's anything that you need, resources, money, a place to stay, an emergency person to call, keep me in your emergency contact. I think that's a powerful thing for women who are struggling with finding the power to leave. Okay. And so in the aftermath of Diddy, I am imploring victims to remain strong, to remain connected to your support base, and to reach out for help. You are not stuck in those situations, even though you may feel stuck. There will be a time when you're looking back and you too will be asking yourself why you stayed for so long. But it's not for the purposes of blaming yourself. It's just knowing that you just didn't have the power, the courage at that time in that moment to do what you needed to do for self, and still offer yourself grace even in looking back at those situations. Thank you so much for joining me on the Korean Connection. And thank you for connecting with us again in the aftermath of the Diddy. Victims, stay strong, and we'll see you next time on the Korean Connection. Let's connect. Thank you guys for connecting with me today. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to my channel, The Korean Connection. To connect with me, you can email me at thekoreanconnection@gmail.com. And don't forget that sometimes your passion whispers before it roars. And if you're listening closely, the next episode might be where it gets louder. Let's connect. Push it to the